Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and connoisseurs of the written word. You know, we scholars love books. We like the way they look, we like their weight, we like their smell, and we literally cannot have enough of them. We like to read books, we like to possess books, and sometimes we like to write books. Okay? Now, talking about those scholars who write books, some of them write just one book in a lifetime, others write many more. But let us talk about those who write just one really major, significant piece of work, an opus, O-P-U-S, an opus, okay, a magnum opus. Let's talk about them. Now, such people literally need to condense a lifetime of thought into that one book. For instance, let us take the case of Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton wrote a book, the Principia Mathematica, which is recognized as one of the great milestones in human thought. Okay? A scientific breakthrough, literally. I mean, after Archimedes, there was almost 14 to 1500 years of silence, mathematical and scientific silence. We had the Dark Ages. And then Newton came along. Of course, before him there was Kepler and Galileo, both of them giants, but this man was a giant among giants. So he wrote this book, Principia Mathematica, in which he condensed literally 30 years of thought. Obviously, when you're condensing that much data and that many deductions, the book is going to be large. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have actually handled a copy of the Principia Mathematica, but it is huge. I have handled one. It looks impressive, quite apart from its impressive contents. Just holding the book, a giant of a book, a juggernaut of a book, a titan of a book, a Goliath of a book, just holding it, fills you with a sense of awe. Okay? And it goes without saying that the Principia Mathematica has had a profound influence on human thought. Basically it is where real science began, Newtonian physics. Physics owes everything, almost everything, to Sir Isaac Newton. So it's easy to get an impression that in order to make one's mark in scholarship or to make one's mark in human thought, one would need to write an opus, O-P-U-S. But you know what? My own personal experience has proven otherwise. Large books, simply because they're large, tend not to be read. I know that sounds terrible, but people are scared when they see the sheer size of the book. They're turned off. They're frightened. I'm sure right now on planet Earth, there are probably less than 20 men who have read the Principia Mathematica from cover to cover. I'm sure of that. In fact, the number may be even smaller. I'm sure fewer men have read the Principia Mathematica from cover to cover in this century than have walked on the moon. I mean, I know that sounds like a crazy comparison, but it holds. And it's very dramatic. More people have climbed Mount Everest than have read the Principia Mathematica from cover to cover. So these big books, these giant books, while appreciated by scholars of equal stature, like Christian Huygens was a contemporary of Sir Isaac Newton, and he read the book from cover to cover, and he appreciated it. Okay, and he immediately promulgated its virtues to everybody. He basically shouted from the rooftops that we were dealing with a genius and that everyone should peruse this book. Okay? But apart from these specialists in the field, a book of that size and that complexity, a turgid tome, is not read by that many and consequently cannot generally influence um, the general public. Okay? Now, calling on my own experience, I have read large books from cover to cover and appreciated them. Like, for example, Leninger's Biochemistry, which I completed in 3 nights of continuous reading. I mean, 12 hours, 12 hours, 12 hours, from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. I completed the whole book. And even now, some of its passages hang in my memory, even after 40 years. So, yes, I have read such books, but in terms of the influence they've had on my thought, on my personality, on my perspective, on my philosophy, it was never the big books that truly influenced me. It was always very small books. For example, I'll tell you 2 books. One book was Atta, A-T-T-A. It is really not a scientific book, but it's a science fiction book. Very slim book, very small book. I mean, I read it almost as an afterthought. I borrowed it from a dance major living upstairs in the rooming house I was living in 1985 in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. And I'm very glad I did, because that book lingers in my memory to this day. It continues to influence the tenor of my thought. It continues to influence the tenor of my emotions. And it continues to influence the tenor of my philosophy. You know, it's like a continuous undercurrent. Who would have thought a slim, tiny book like that with such a simple title, Atta, A-T-T-A. It's about an ant, basically, that goes, it's about a man, rather, who becomes a miniature human being and goes into the ant world, meets up with a whole bunch of ants and undergoes some really picaresque adventures amongst them. But it was a very poignant book, a very profound book. I cannot even explain why it is so poignant and profound. That's one of the things about truly great books. You really can't explain why they had such a powerful effect on you. Okay, another book that I read, this was in 1977, 10 years before, approximately 10 years before I read Atta. I don't even remember the name. Once again, this was a book of fiction, a very tiny book, a very small book that was on sale because nobody was buying it. I bought it in a bookshop in Visakhapatnam, India, and read it once again from cover to cover. Obviously, easy. Reading a tiny book like that from cover to cover is no great feat. But the funny thing is, I don't remember the title of the book, nor even the author's name. That's the funny thing. I just remember the cover picture, a man hanging from the underside of a helicopter taking off. He's like, midair. And it dealt with the crash of a Soviet spacecraft in the jungles. Yeah, I think some Central American jungle or whatever. And the name of the spacecraft was Solinishko. And some people go there to retrieve it, and they find the burnt out bodies of the astronauts inside that Solinishko spacecraft. I don't even remember the story. Funny, I don't remember the name of the author, the title of the book, just these bits and pieces, these tiny vignettes that haunt my memory, but they continue to influence me to this day. I mean, who would have thought fragments can influence you? But I just remember fragments from that book. So if I were asked by somebody, of all the hundreds of books that I've read, which are the 2 books that most influenced me, my emotions, my thoughts, I would immediately point to these 2 books. I mean, I really wish I had kept copies of these 2 books. I mean, Atta, I lost it in the United States. And this other book, I think I basically discarded it. That's a funny thing. Great books like that don't immediately have an effect on you. They sink into your subconscious and they germinate there. The flower emerges much, much later. So it was only much later I realized how much influence these 2 books had on me. The point I'm trying to make here is, we as scholars don't need to write a giant of a book, don't need to write a juggernaut of a book. A tiny book can influence others. I don't know how many others have read these 2 books that I just mentioned, how many others were influenced. But all that many people don't need to be influenced. If you're an intellectual capable of acting on what you felt, you can influence many millions. So if it influenced, say, a couple of, say, 20 or 30 other people, that's a huge, giant number. I mean, how many people has Principia Mathematica influenced? I mean, people have read it, understood it, and used it as professional physicists. That's not the same as influencing you. Influencing, that word implies a more broad effect on you, a more cycloramic effect on you. So, coming back, I digress. You don't need to write an opus. Instead, you can write let us write it out. Opuscule. 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 There's another word, same meaning, slight variation of this word, and that is opuscule. Opusculum. Opusculum. What does this mean? Opuscule means a tiny book, okay, a small book, a small piece of work, a small piece of important work. I mean, a book doesn't have to be a giant to be important. After all, there are certain research papers that have influenced mankind. For example, Watson and Crick's research paper on the double helix is not very long, but it's a landmark paper. So you don't need to write an opus the way Sir Isaac Newton wrote. You can write an opuscule, a smaller version of an opus, a small book, a very important book. You can write an opusculum. One other book, I mentioned 2 books in fiction. Let us now go to non-fiction. Back in 1995, thereabouts, okay? Don't quote me on that, thereabouts. Around 1994, 1995, I was rummaging through a second-hand bookshop in Vijayawada. That's on the east, that's a city close to the east coast of India. And I discovered this really lovely small book. I don't remember the title completely, but I think it was called The Comparative Physiology of Respiration. And I think it was written by a scientist named Hughes, Hughes. Don't quote me on this. I'm recalling events from 30 years ago. But I'm fairly sure that this was the title of the book and this was the name of the author. Comparative Respiratory Physiology, something like that. Or Comparative Physiology of Respiration. One of those 2 names. Okay? That book was a gem. I mean, this was such a lovely book. Very well written. And it is my regret to this day that I lost it. I mean, I seem to have a penchant for losing valuable books. I mean, I know I lost those 2 other books that I mentioned earlier, and now I lost this book too. The title is either Comparative Respiratory Physiology or Comparative Physiology of Respiration. The author is Hughes, Hughes. Okay, you can check it out. I'm sure if you type in these 2 sentences in Google, I'm sure you'll come up with the right title. It's not a difficult book to trace, and it was a masterpiece. I mean, this book is a classic. I read it from cover to cover, and basically what he does is he discusses the respiratory physiology of different species, all the way from fishes to human beings to frogs, whatever, amphibians, everything. That's why the title is comparative. He's comparing the physiologies, the respiratory physiologies of various different species. I don't know if this gentleman realized what a profound effect he had on me. I'm sure other people who read it found it to be a very felicitous and enlightening experience. I really wish I had kept a copy of it. I made notes of it too. I mean, I took down some of the facts he mentioned and my own conclusions on those facts. I lost even those notes. I mean, not only did I lose the book, I lost whatever notes I made on the book. I mean, my own research notes on that book. But if you can get hold of this book and Atta, okay, kindly do read them. I will not give you a guarantee that they will have the same effect on you as they did on me, but surely, at the minimum, you'll find them deeply interesting. Okay? So, scholars out there, you can be humble. You don't have to aspire for the giant tome. You can write a small book and be assured, if it is well written, mind you. I mean, not all small books are well written. I know several popular science books written today that are small, but boy, they're horribly written. I mean, it would be invidious of me to repeat their titles, but I know one book written by a prominent scientist that's small, that's sold in the millions of copies, but which I found to be truly badly written. I mean, it was neither enlightening nor interesting, so it was just a waste of money. But this book, Comparative Physiology of Respiration, I'm sure you'll find interesting. Because of the way the data is presented. I mean, a scientist may know a lot of stuff, but not every scientist can write well. I mean, there are a few people like Steven Weinberg, who wrote the first 3 minutes, that write extremely well, who are extremely articulate. But not all scientists are that articulate. So many of the science books out there, popular science books out there, are not that well written. But this is not a popular science book, I hasten to add. This Comparative Physiology of Respiration, or Comparative Respiratory Physiology by Hughes, is actually a textbook. I mean, this was meant to be read by serious university level graduate students. You were expected to master the contents. But it was so well written, you could read it like a novel. So clear, so limpid, and you could come away from it with a real appreciation of what it means to breathe, what it means to respire. Something we do, hundreds and thousands of times each day, but which we don't think about at all. Okay, so we scholars, to repeat once again, we can be humble. We can write our own tiny book, and if it is well written, we can be assured of our position, of our place in posterity. Okay, posterity will know about us through our teeny tiny tomes. Okay, that's a what's the right word? Yeah, that's an oxymoron. A tiny tome. It sounds an oxymoron because a tome, by definition, is a giant. But anyway, I'll stick to it because it's so alliterative. A teeny tiny tome will guarantee your fame in the future. All right, I'll stop here for now. Ladies and gentlemen, opuscule, opusculum, be well versed, read a lot, and write your own opuscule, and earn your fame in the future. Bye for now.